This is What's So Hard About Translation video number 13, a and the. A and the are two of the most commonly used words in English, but even people who grew up speaking the language have trouble explaining what these words mean. In this video, we take a few minutes to explore how these words are used. An understanding of what we do with them will inform our discussion of translation difficulties later on. To pursue this investigation, we'll consider a series of sentences with words missing and decide whether they would be best completed with a or the. Then see if we can articulate the principles that inform those decisions. To begin, let's consider this sentence. The blank line before the word question indicates the spot where we need to supply a or the to complete it. So which sounds better? A question came up or the question came up? Both are perfectly acceptable English sentences. Notice, however, if we choose the, it is as though someone had just mentioned a question and we should already know what it is. If we choose a, however, it is as though this is the first mention of the question's existence. Now let's consider this sentence. It's very similar to the first sentence except that the word question has been replaced with the word son. Which word fits best this time, a or the? While both sentences are grammatical, the statement that a son came up is slightly jarring. In our day-to-day experience, there's only one sun, so it is far more common to say, the sun came up. This leads to our first hypothesis, that we use the word the to refer to unique things and the word a to refer to things of which there may be multiple examples. To test this hypothesis, we'll consider another pair of sentences. In the first, we don't know which rabbit is being referred to, so saying a rabbit seems best. In the second case, there is only one moon, so according to our hypothesis, we should refer to it as the moon. Since the hypothesis holds for two unique things, we'll tentatively note it down as our first rule and explore further. Next, let's consider two consecutive sentences. This time the blanks are only in the second sentence. Does a or the fit better in these blanks? Both are possible, but notice that if we choose to put a in the blanks, we will interpret the man and the unicycle in the second sentence to be different than the man and the unicycle that were mentioned in the first sentence. If we choose the, however, we will interpret the man and the unicycle in the second sentence to be the same as the man and the unicycle in the first. Based on this example, we can posit a couple more rules about when to use a and the. We use a when a referent has not yet been mentioned, but the when it has. Let's see if these observations hold up as we gather more data. Once again, we'll consider a sequence of two sentences with words missing from the second. We see that the first sentence follows our current rules by using a to modify man and unicycle, since these are the first mentions of each. In the second sentence, we see unicycle is preceded by the. This is also in accordance with our rules because unicycle was already mentioned in the first sentence. What then should come before seat, a or the? Since seat has not been mentioned yet, our rules say that we should use a. The same goes for tire. Our sentences now read, once there was a man with a unicycle. The unicycle was blue, but a seat was black and a tire was orange. We can hear immediately that something is wrong with this. If the seat and the tire in question are the ones that are attached to the unicycle, both of the a's in the second sentence should be changed to the. But why? We'll suggest that it's because we know that unicycles have seats and tires, and that the mention of a unicycle in the first sentence also brought to mind the parts that make it up. Based on this hypothesis, we'll add a new rule to our list. Use the when the referent is part of something that has already been mentioned. To test this rule, we'll next consider another set of sentences, but one that is very similar to the last pair. The only difference is that we have exchanged the unicycle for a bicycle. Since the seat and tire are both part of the bicycle, our rule says that they should both be preceded by the. Our sentences now read, once there was a man with a bicycle. The bicycle was blue, but the seat was black, and the tire was orange. This time using the with seat sounds fine, but we hear a problem when we get to the last clause. The tire was orange. What's wrong this time? Well, a bicycle has 2 tires, and we don't know which one the speaker means, so using a sounds better than using the in this case. This leads us to reconsider our rules once again. Perhaps it's not enough to simply be a part of what has already been mentioned. Perhaps the referent in question needs to be a unique part. We can test this by exchanging the bicycle in these sentences for a tandem bicycle, a kind of bicycle with 2 seats. If we follow our current rule, we will once again insert the in both blanks. This time we are left with uncertainty about both which seat and which tire the speaker is referring to. We conclude that both blanks are better filled by a than the. Considering the last 3 examples together, we see that whenever a word refers to a part of a vehicle which cannot be confused with another part, we prefer to use the. But whenever a word refers to a part that might be confused with another, we prefer to use a. Given these results, we can revise our rule to say that we should use the when the referent of a word is a unique part of something that has already been mentioned. Combining all our observations, our rules say that we should use the when the referent is unique, or has already been mentioned, or is a unique part of something that has already been mentioned. Otherwise, we should use a. Let's see how well this formulation stands up in more examples. Since neither of the nouns in this next sentence have appeared in a previous sentence, and neither is unique in the world, and since a knife is not part of a blade, our rules say that both of these nouns should be preceded by a. What we find if we do this, however, is that this formulation implies that the knife in question must have more than one blade. If we know, however, that the knife does have only one blade, it is more natural to modify the first noun, blade, with the. If the sentence is now correct, however, it means that we will once again have to modify our rules, because they did not correctly predict the usage that sounds correct to us. This next paragraph stretches our rules even further. All the nouns are preceded by the, even though they have not been mentioned before and are not part of anything that has. How can that be right? For most North Americans, the paragraph describes a kind of event they have seen and participated in many times. It is a pretty typical beginning to a meal of a more formal variety. It's so familiar that it's almost as though there is an implicit opening sentence that the reader automatically supplies. The event is brought to mind both by the food items listed in the paragraph and the setting that is alluded to. As the event is brought to mind by the few details stated in the paragraph, it is as though all the other typical parts of the event have been mentioned as well, including the food that is part of the meal, the objects that make up a typical setting, and the processes that typically precede and follow the meal itself. Typical events like these are sometimes referred to as scenarios, scripts, or narratives. We can think of them as cultural patterns that we learn through repeated experience and which inform our expectations and the words we choose when we talk about them. These patterns can be quite complex, as this next set of paragraphs illustrates. The first is very similar to the one we just considered, so the use of the with the nouns it contains will come as no surprise. The use of the with opening kickoff in the next paragraph, however, might raise some questions. Which opening kickoff is being referred to here, and what does it have to do with a meal? For many, if not most, Americans, the answers are obvious. But for anyone not familiar with American cultural practices, the connection may be a bit of a mystery. Clarity comes through the realization that the food items mentioned call to mind not just any meal, but a Thanksgiving celebration. Activation of the Thanksgiving scenario brings to mind an array of other associations built up through a lifetime of Thanksgivings. These include the sequence of events that make up a typical Thanksgiving narrative. Included in this narrative are the things people do after a meal, activities which often include watching football on TV. To understand why there is a "the" before opening kickoff, one also needs to be familiar with the narrative of a typical televised football game. There is one opening kickoff, which marks the beginning of the game itself. Thus, a unique opening kickoff finds its way into the Thanksgiving Day narrative by virtue of its inclusion in the football game narrative, which explains its place in the paragraph and the presence of the word "the" just before it. So what impact might our latest observations have on our rules governing the use of "a" and "the"? While it may seem that these examples will inevitably add layers of complexity, they actually suggest a more simplified approach. We can replace our previous collection of rules with just two. Use "the" to tell your audience that you believe that they can uniquely identify the referent of a word, and use "a" when you don't think that they can. You may remember Zeke and Ted from an earlier discussion of inference. We suggested that each carries around in his head a model of what the world is like, and that each of their models includes an idea of what is included in the other one's model of the world. What we're saying in this video is that if Zeke is deciding between "a" and "the" when he mentions a bicycle to Ted, and he believes that Ted can uniquely identify the bicycle he wants to talk about, Zeke will use "the." On the other hand, if he believes that Ted will not be able to uniquely identify the bicycle he has in mind, he will use "a." This concept of something being uniquely identifiable is important enough that it has its own label. Linguists call this trait definiteness. Nouns that are uniquely identifiable are said to be definite, and those that aren't are said to be indefinite. In general, "the" is a marker of definiteness and "a" of indefiniteness. But using these two words is not the only way that definiteness is indicated in English. In fact, in many instances, any of a number of other words take the spot that "a" or "the" would otherwise occupy. And plurals, and especially proper names, often don't have anything at all in that position. While these other words convey certain kinds of information that "a" and "the" do not, each of these, or a combination of them, also indicates whether the nouns they precede are uniquely identifiable or not. You may remember that in English, the category of number is obligatory, which is another way of saying that the vast majority of nouns in English must be marked as either singular or plural, but not both, and not either. In the same way, English grammar requires us to indicate whether nouns are definite or indefinite. That is to say, we must tell the person we're addressing whether or not we think they can uniquely identify the thing we're talking about. That means we can't say something like this: "Here comes little girl walking big dog. Dog is bigger than girl and seems to be very frisky animal. I hope she can keep firm grip on leash." English grammar requires us to include words that will make it clear whether the girl, the dog, and the leash are definite or indefinite. Chances are that if you grew up in America, you have never thought about the process of deciding whether to mark a noun as definite or indefinite while you speak. In your experience, marking nouns as definite or indefinite probably seems easy and automatic. But you will feel this is true only if you grew up speaking English or another language for which marking definiteness is an obligatory feature of the grammar. As you may now understand, choosing how to mark each noun is a complex and sophisticated process, which nonetheless seems simple to people who have done it their whole lives. As we'll see later in the series, not all languages require speakers to indicate whether a noun is definite or indefinite, but many require speakers to make other distinctions that would seem to require an enormous amount of mental energy to get right. These differences create problems for translation as well.